Greetings, Internet. In the summer of 1968, Triumph began production of the second iteration of its GT6, known as the GT6 Mark II or the GT6 Plus. The press kit I've seen for the introduction of the GT6 Mark II had information embargoed until late September 1968. So that tells us that Triumph was ramping up production in order to get units to market for the late fall announcement of the car. With this version of the GT6, Triumph was responding to two common complaints from automotive journalists and general consumers. One having to do with the limits of the rear suspension in the Mark I, and the other having to do with poor cabin ventilation in the Mark I. So Triumph responded to these issues as well as adding some other upgrades and luxury touches. In this video, I'm going to talk about the marketing for the GT6 Mark II/Plus in the UK and the US, with a special focus on a particular new feature with this version of the car, and that is the Triplex heated rear window that was introduced in 1968 for the 1969 model year, and then went through a redesign in 1970. I will get to that discussion on the other side. Before we get started, I do want to say that this is one of those videos, perhaps one of many videos, that I could not make without help from my friends in the online Triumph community. Without being able to get information from different Triumph owners, it's really impossible to get to the bottom of the types of issues of originality that I'm going to address a little bit later on in the episode. And of course, the internet makes that relatively easy to get information. But when I pop online and I start asking questions about tedious details of cars, I'm really grateful for those Triumph enthusiasts who are willing to chime in and supply information and try to help me get to the bottom of these things. So I want to start out by expressing really sincere gratitude about that. Let's begin by establishing a general pattern that is important to our overall narrative and important context for everything that is to come. In July 1966, Triumph began production of the GT6, the version of the car that would later come to be known as the Mark I. According to at least a couple of books on my shelf, the early run of GT6s that were produced were all sent to North America, with other markets not taking delivery of cars until early 1967. And this helps to illustrate a well-known and often reiterated fact in Triumph history, and that is that the U.S. market was absolutely essential to Triumph in its glory days. This makes sense. The U.S. market is an extremely large market, lots of disposable income, serious car culture. I'm not really telling you anything surprising here, but I do want to establish that as important context for what I'm about to cover. The idea of Triumph catering to the U.S. market actually comes up in some of the articles that I've read, specifically with UK journalists offering a lot of snark in their reviews of the GT6 Mark I because they felt that Triumph had created a soft boulevard cruiser for the American market as opposed to a hard-edged, true sports car. As I mentioned before, the second version of the GT6 was officially announced in the fall of 1968, at which point supply was supposed to be available worldwide. The car was marketed differently in the UK and the US. In the UK and most markets, it was known as the GT6 Mark II. In North America, in the US market, it was known as the GT6 Plus, although according to sources, GT6 Plus badging did make its way into other markets. I'm going to start out here by talking about US and UK marketing, so let's go ahead and get to the slideshow. The early UK ads and brochure for the GT6 Mark II featured the famous more sting in the engine, more cling in the tail slogan. Regarding the more sting in the engine, in all markets, the GT6 Mark II/Plus used the redesigned cylinder head and other upgrades from Triumph's larger displacement six-cylinder engine, and UK marketing seemed keen to emphasize the gains to a claimed 104 brake horsepower. Moreover, the more cling in the tail clearly emphasized the new Rotaflex rear suspension. The topics of the engine and rear suspension take up approximately 2/3 of the text of the initial UK print ad that appeared in the 26 September 1968 issue of Autocar magazine. Note that the heated rear window merely gets a brief sentence at the end of the text of this particular ad. You can see there it says, "The rear window is heated." In general, early US marketing was far more muted when it came to the engine. This is the full-page ad for the 1969 model year, the Fasterback with the fog-free window. This ad describes the car as a Fasterback, which emphasizes that the car is faster, but there is actually little focus on the engine in the text of the ad. The reason for a tack so different from UK marketing probably had much to do with emissions controls on the US engine. Sports Car Graphics review of the 1969 GT6 Plus, which you can see there, states that the 1967 GT6 Mark I they tested was measurably and noticeably faster, although the authors complained about a number of things with the setup of the GT6 Plus they tested, and their overall review was positive. Meanwhile, Road and Track said the GT6 Plus they tested was 0.8 of a second faster through the quarter mile and a little faster on the top end than the initial version of the GT6. Regardless of who is right and why, in the end, the revised emissions-controlled engine had the same claimed brake horsepower as a GT6 Mark I at 95. Triumph spun this by telling the journalists at Road and Track that the Mark I's claimed horsepower was exaggerated by being a gross rating, but the GT6 Plus was a true net rated 95. Regardless, that the claimed horsepower number for the Mark I and the GT6 Plus was the same probably explains why the engine improvements are referenced but not overly emphasized in the US marketing. Consequently, in the US, luxury and comfort touches got more attention. The whole first paragraph of the Fasterback with the fog-free window ad is about the heated rear glass, and that is followed by suspension talk and then comfort and safety details. So you can see here in that ad, the first paragraph, the rear window on the new 69 Triumph GT6 Plus is heated electronically. A heating grid fused on the inner surface frees the glass of fog, ice, and snow, all with the flip of the switch. Then at the very end, you get a final bit of emphasis on the heated rear window. The half-page ad from the same ad campaign merely mentions added power to make a fastback faster among 7 other selling points focusing on performance, appearance, and comfort. One of these selling points is heating grid fused into rear window to keep the fastback fog free. It's tinted too. Information on the new heated rear window may be found in the GT6 factory workshop manual as updated for the Mark II/Plus in the electrical section. Here the reader gets basic information on the Triplex Hotline sun-dim glass. Hotline is an obvious reference to the heating elements, and sun-dim is an obvious reference to the tinting. Sun-dim. I'll note that Pilkington, of which Triplex became a subsidiary before the brand was apparently retired in 1993, seems to still use the sun-dim term. The workshop manual provides a nice black and white photo of the glass itself, and following a description of the way the glass is manufactured and how it functions, the manual emphasizes that no maintenance is required. While manual information is useful, there is the expected manufacturer's mark etched on the glass itself, although I'm not sure I would have found it without a little help from online friends because it's not as easy to find or as obvious as the labeling on most of the Triumph Triplex glass I've seen over the years. The mark is in the bottom center, directly above the boot handle. I noted that quite a few people online claimed that there were no marks on their early heated rear glass with vertical elements, and well, I suppose it's possible for the mark to be rubbed or polished to the point of more or less disappearing. People probably miss it because the mark is so difficult to see in many different lights and conditions. All right, so now I'm going to attempt to read the manufacturer's markings on my glass. I did a little bit of research. I want to state that I'm especially indebted to an article I found within the MG community that attempts to discuss the history of triplex markings over the years. I will provide a link to that article in the video description below. So here goes. My understanding for triplex markings of this era is that what we are looking for are dots. So first and foremost, triplex indicated the quarter of the year in which glass was manufactured by using letters in the triplex name at the top of the logo. So the T at the beginning of triplex represented the first quarter, the R represented the second quarter, and then moving to the end of the name, the E represented the third quarter, and the X, the final letter in triplex, represented the fourth quarter. So here you can see I have a dot over the T in triplex that indicates that my glass was manufactured in the first quarter of the year. There are two dots over the T there, or it looks like there are two dots over the T there. I don't know what that means. I don't know if at some point triplex started putting multiple dots above letters in order to indicate a specific month or something like that. I didn't come across anything like that in my research, but I feel comfortable in saying that the glass was manufactured in the first quarter because I have the dot over the T in triplex. The year is determined based on a dot that appears on the bottom line of the logo. And in this case, we have hotline sundim in that bottom line. At various points in triplex's history and with different products, there's just a single name for the bottom line, and it's much shorter, and there can be multiple dots, and you have to use math to figure out the year of manufacture. But in this case, we have a lot of letters in the bottom line, and it's much simpler. So as you can see on my glass, I have a dot under the S. So all we have to do is figure out what number the S represents, and we figure that out by counting from the beginning of the bottom line, which is the H in hotline. So let's count and figure it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So the S is the 8th letter in the bottom line, and so that tells us that this glass was manufactured in 1968. So my glass on my car was manufactured in the first quarter of 1968. This perfectly matches with what I know about my car. By commission number, my car would have been among the first 50 Mark II/pluses produced. And while we know cars were not strictly produced in sequence by commission number, we know that the manufacture of the GT6 Mark II/plus began in July, and my heritage certificate says that my car was completed on the 11th of August, 1968. So it is a very early car, and it makes sense that the glass would have been produced in the first quarter of 1968. And by the way, you may already know this. I think I probably came across it at some point in the past and just forgot about it, but I was reminded of it in the little bit of research that I did on these triplex manufacturers marks. But that logo down at the bottom, that heart or kite logo, actually stands for British Vehicular Safety. When you look closely at that logo, you can see it has a B, a V, and an S in it. So if you were not aware of that before, you can take that little tidbit with you as well. But that's enough of those details. Let's get back to the big picture. I started out discussing the early print ads for the GT6 Mark II/Plus in the UK and the US, emphasizing how the US made a big deal about the heated rear glass, while it was a minor selling point in the UK. I'm leaving print ads now because apparently by the 1970 model year, the heated rear glass was old news. The 1970 US ads I've seen don't reference it at all, and I have no reason to think it suddenly emerged as a focal point in whatever UK print ads were out there. So let's turn to sales brochures. US sales brochures from this period are quite nice and offer color images of the heated rear window and focus on it, while this aspect of the car gets no special attention in contemporary UK brochures. So this is the 1969 US sales brochure, which offers many great color images of the car and is, to my mind, an essential reference for anyone trying to restore a car with an eye to originality. Here's the page in that brochure that focuses on the details at the back of the car. And here's a close-up of the heated rear glass. This is the last page of the brochure with its tame but clear "Triumph is for lovers" late 1960s theme. For the 1969-1970 sales brochures, Triumph in the US relied heavily on images of couples and romantic scenes with the featured car nearby. That's what we get here. The 1970 GT6 Plus sales brochure in the US offers much the same thematically, with images of couples and romantic scenes like this and this. Nice big glossy photos of couples and romantic scenes. But the brochure is particularly interesting for our purposes because it highlights car features with focused photos and relatively detailed descriptions. So this is the page featuring the discussion of the heated rear window. And here's the close-up of the rear glass. In sharp contrast, the UK sales brochures for 1969 and 1970 do not offer any photographic focus on the heated rear glass. This is the 1969 sales brochure with the famous "more sting in the engine, more cling in the tail" slogan. It's a relatively short brochure in comparison with those used in the US, and it features this lovely model with "come hither" eyes. I've had this brochure for several years, and it actually just recently registered that it actually features a left-hand drive car for whatever reason. Note that the image in the bottom right of the rear hatch opening barely shows the window at all, and the heated rear glass is just briefly referenced in the brochure's text. There's a simple line that says, quote, "The rear window is heated, so you're always well aware of what's going on behind," end quote. This brochure is mostly about speed, performance, and sex appeal. There are racetrack images on the early pages. It doesn't have the same type of photos of couples and romantic settings that the US brochure has. That changes, though, with the cover of the 1970 UK sales brochure, which features a couple in a pastoral setting. This brochure is generally the same as the 1969 brochure, with some new photos substituted in, including the one on the cover. And of course, now the cover features a damson red car instead of the signal red car shown on the 1969 cover. There are also minor alterations in the text and other details. Note the emphasis on the changes to the engine and rear suspension from the 1969 cover was dropped, obviously because they were the previous year's updates and therefore no longer new. So at the top of the page there, you get a very plain looking Triumph GT6 Mark II. While some of the images from the 1969 sales brochure appear in the 1970, among the new images is that of a model in the interior. These new shots were, of course, necessitated by the changes in the interior between 1969 and 1970, such as the reclining seats and the new steering wheel. And note, too, that these photos actually feature a right-hand drive car. But the main point here is that the rear hatch glass is not featured. The image in the bottom right is essentially the same as the one used in the 1969 brochure. It's the same type of shot, different car, different model, but the same type of shot. And all it shows really is kind of the luggage space that's available at the back of the car. There's certainly no focus on heated rear window. Now here's where we get to the key part. At some point in 1970, Triplex redesigned the heated rear glass so that the heating elements were horizontal instead of vertical. The questions are, when was this change made, and when did the factory begin installing these redesigned rear windows on cars? When the GT6 Mark III was introduced, the UK sales brochure was a glossy one with a gimmicky narrative designed to create an aura of mystery or intrigue. What I want to note here is that the rear glass shown in the Mark III brochure that was first printed in 1970 and was used all the way through to the end of the GT6 in 1973 features the early style glass with vertical heating elements. And you can see that in this close-up. Incidentally, there seems to be a pattern with Triumph at home that when it became evident that a model was going to wither on the vine, the marketing just simply went on echo mode. I just mentioned this sales brochure came out for the Mark III at the end of 1970, and some version of this exact sales brochure was used all the way through 1973. Similar to what happened with the GT6 Mark III, the UK sales brochure for the late Spitfire 1500 was used from 1977 through the end of the Spitfire's run in 1980-81. I don't currently own a copy of the 1971 US GT6 Mark III sales brochure, and in the digital images I've seen, I've not been able to make out the elements on the hatch of the car featured in that brochure. If anyone can help me out with that, I'll add the information among the notes and corrections in the video description. It is completely clear, though, that the car in the 1972 US brochure has horizontal elements, and here's a close-up of that. And this brings me to an important aspect of this video. John Thomason, in his crucially important Triumph Spitfire and GT6, A Guide to Originality, states that the change in the glass from vertical to horizontal elements occurred during the run of the GT6 Mark III. Indeed, and this particular image comes, of course, from the GT6 Mark III section of his book, but he writes, the tailgate was identical to that of the Mark II, except that it now featured a heated rear window with horizontal heating elements. However, until stocks of Mark II windows were used up, very early Mark IIIs had vertical heater elements. I originally took this statement at face value, but I've subsequently learned to be somewhat suspicious of tidy narratives about production changes. Of course, the situation with the rear window is muddied by the fact that production of the GT6 Mark II/Plus and the GT6 Mark III overlapped between October and December 1970, although it's not clear that's the main factor in this particular case. At this point, I can say that Thomason's claim does not appear to be accurate insofar as it suggests or implies that Triumph deliberately used up supply of vertical line glass before shifting to the new horizontal line glass, and that this transition happened at some point fairly early into Mark III production. It seems doubtful that this is true for cars exported to the U.S. at least, as I've heard from original owners of GT6 Pluses whose cars definitely were delivered with the horizontal elements, and I know other GT6 Plus owners who have good reason to believe their cars originally were delivered with horizontal elements. From an informal survey of online enthusiasts, it is certain that glass with horizontal elements was being installed in at least some GT6 Pluses manufactured in 1970, possibly starting at least as early as mid-1970. I'll note that one owner claimed a horizontal window on a May 1970 build. It is possible that some early glass replacements have misled some people who are not original owners, but I have some original owner reports that I am confident in. A general rule of thumb seems to be that 1969 model year cars had vertical elements, but glass with horizontal elements was being mixed in during production of the 1970 model year cars during the 1970 calendar year. Much more research is needed to nail all this down, but these are the preliminary findings and guesses. More reports from original owners and collecting dates of manufacture for glass with vertical and horizontal elements would help clarify things considerably. Now, is it possible that UK market cars exclusively or nearly exclusively used vertical elements until final stock was used up per Thomason's statement? That would certainly make Thomason's claim accurate for the UK market, which is the focus in his book. And I didn't hear from any UK GT6 Mark II owners who claimed to have cars that originally came with horizontal elements, but I'm obviously working with very limited information and feedback. I started by referencing how the American market was Triumph's most important. Is it possible that Triumph considered the horizontal elements an upgrade or otherwise of particular value for the North American market and consequently dedicated early supply to American market cars? We do have reason to think about the horizontal elements as an upgrade. As someone better trained in technology than I pointed out, the vertical elements can allow frost, for example, to persist between the elements, while horizontal grids will generally create melting ice rolling down the glass to assist with thorough melt through the entire viewing area. Moreover, as Thomason discusses, at some point in 1970, Triumph began placing a warning sticker on the hatch emphasizing how luggage contacting the elements can break them. This is obviously in response to problems that dealers were seeing with the heated rear glass being damaged by customers. Logic would suggest that the vertical elements were more vulnerable to this kind of problem than the horizontal, although obviously the problem can certainly happen with both. I offer all of this because, given the primacy of the American market, if the horizontal elements were considered an upgrade, it seems possible that Triumph began using the horizontal elements for American-bound cars before others. Regardless, Thomason's claim about the transition from vertical to horizontal elements is in doubt, or at least certain obvious implications or interpretations of his claim are in doubt. Of course, I don't mean that as a harsh criticism of Thomason, to whom, as I've said before, we owe a tremendous debt. If there is an error, whether of substance or lack of clarity, it's the sort of thing bound to happen here and there in a project as ambitious as the one he embarked upon in his book. This is just my little attempt to clarify the record. And obviously, I personally get things wrong from time to time on my YouTube channel and elsewhere, so I'm certainly not throwing stones from my glass house. And ultimately, while I've put a lot of work into this video, there are things in this video that I could be wrong about as well, and I'm completely open to that. So that's what I have, and obviously the story is still at this point incomplete. I hope to continue gathering information on this transition from vertical heating elements to horizontal heating elements on the triplex rear window and see if I can't sort of further refine our sense of when and how this transition happened. I do know that this is a tedious detail that not everybody cares about, and that's fine. Obviously, I care about it, and I enjoy trying to sift through the evidence and see what I can figure out when it comes to details like this. So I will persist with it when I can. That's it for this episode of the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel. I hope to be back before too long with another episode. I have a couple of things in the works, and I think the next episode that comes out will probably be an errata video. That's errata video, not erotic video. Nobody wants to see an erotic video produced by and starring me. Errata, of course, is a publishing term having to do with the correction of errors that have made their way into print. However, this is the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel, so I'm taking creative license in using the term. But I've always intended to periodically put out videos in which I correct errors or clarify fuzziness in my videos. And I have a couple of those issues that I would like to address. So I've been working that up in the background lately. And so I do think that my next video will be an errata video. The academic year has started. I am extremely busy right now, so I will not be producing videos at the rate that I was over the summer, but I do intend to continue steadily working on content and getting it out when I can. So hopefully my next video will be out before too long. In the meantime, please take care, and thank you for watching.